Ah yes, the BBC, an institution that has spanned a century. The corporation that kept us warm and entertained during the long nights of the Blitz, and broke the news of the nation's favourite grandma sadly passing away. It has long been recognised as the giant in entertainment, producing such notable classics as Only Fools and Horses, Fawlty Towers, Little Britain, and of course, EastEnders. The indigenous British people, surrounded by doctors and engineers, gather merrily around the old cathode ray television daily just to watch their favourite entertainer fix all of the things in their lives, while being completely oblivious to the fact he was a massive nonce. Or maybe they watched a social engineer telling them all about stop eating meat or the climate change will kill them with AIDS. And all of that was paid for by the TV licence. Yes, that's right audience, the publicly funded body who served the British people under the banner of a royal charter are not the honourable, impartial and most importantly balanced institution that they claim they are. The unhinged race baiting. When us British fellas tune in our television sets for the night, we love to watch our favourite BBC political programming. And on the 28th of June 2020, that chosen programme was Countryfile, a show that focuses on the beauty of the British countryside and has like cows in it and stuff. But this time, it was a bit different, as something had happened 4,000 miles away. Yeah, St. George of Floyd died to death because of a murderous fentanyl overdose called Derek Chauvin. But for some reason, the BBC woke up one morning thinking, oh my balls, this is totally our fault. The bigoted public will pay for what they did 4,000 miles away in a completely different country. So they get Dwayne Fields, a man of power, to collect our thoughts from across the great nation, and so began to tell the disgustingly white native indigenous population that us BAME fellas who have melanin in our skin are sick of you dirty countryside folk. Because although I have absolutely no evidence of any racial incidents to present to you, you're all a bunch of racists and have made us black folk feel very uncomfortable when we go for a walk in a field. That's a very powerful and not divisive speech, and is exactly the type of impartial fact-based reporting that the BBC are constrained to do so with in the Royal Charter. But how did those British folk take it? Not well actually. There were mass riots in Cornwall, famines in Norwich, and 50 arrests of white cabbages. It was so sad. But something changed within the social fabric of the United Kingdom. The BBC had worked their magic, because not only a week later after that show aired, Let's Review Crap Writing, witnessed firsthand a black man enjoying a summer's walk in the countryside. Oh, how I cried. Oh, there were such joyous tears. The BBC had defeated countryside racism, and so everybody in close proximity immediately took the fattest knee of their life and all clapped. However, the message handed down by the BBC was not enough to convince every indigenous native that black people can walk in the countryside. So let's introduce Dorset, a southwestern county basking in sun, sea and glorious sands. And also, it has one of the lowest crime rates in the country. But there is a little bit of an issue, audience. Dorset is 98% white. What? You mean to tell me a county within a majority white country has a majority of indigenous people living within it? Get the fuck out of here, that is utterly terrible. And the BBC agreed, because they ran the most devastating piece of journalism since the declaration of war. Rural racism in Dorset. Why is our countryside 98% white? Where they get telling us that the death of George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter protests may have seemed like a distant reality to many people in Dorset. But as some of the 2.1% who do not identify as white can testify, racism can be as much of a problem in the countryside as it is in our cities. That is a very big claim. I'm sure everyone in Dorset was absolutely devastated that someone 4,000 fucking miles away died to death of a Derek Chauvin fentanyl overdose. So, what was the evidence that the BBC presented? Absolutely fuck all. There was no evidence within the article, it was just somebody's feelings. What? I thought the Royal Charter said fact-based journalism. Strangely though, the story doesn't end there because the BBC needed to investigate hardlier. It is the license fees payers' money after all, and this is exactly what they wanted from us. So let's welcome to the stage, is university racist? And then, is the church racist? But that's not all we need, because we want to know, is Britain racist? And of course, the lived experience of being black in Britain, where those poor fellas have such a hard time functioning in a multicultural society. And this came as a massive surprise to the indigenous population, because up until now, Every race across the fucking planet has been endlessly immigrating here. It would be kind of weird to actively go to a country that is considered really, really racist. So the BBC began looking into audience feedback, and it was not good. It turned out that the British population kind of don't take too kindly to being beaten around the head with a stick of unfounded and unprovoked accusations. We need to do more, reads the head of communications. This social engineering against white people, it's just not working out for us. Drat, cries out the director of diversity, if we're going to reach 100% diversity here, then we need to only hire 100% diversity. But that damn Equality Act 2010 is totally stopping us. You know, the Equality Act, the law that clearly states you cannot discriminate based on protected characteristics like race. This is a really tough one. How can the BBC grifters actively discriminate against people's skin colour and get away with it? I've got it, shouts the director of diversity. We can get around it by calling it an internship, because somehow, I'm not shitting you here audience, you can racially discriminate if you call it an internship and also pay them less. Hurrah, cries the room. We can hire minorities and pay them slave wages. We're totally doing the right thing. And it was a great success. The BBC, in a country that pays their wages, happily told the majority population that they're worthless fucking scumbags for having the wrong skin colour. And everybody lived happily ever after. Until they didn't. It was on the 11th of July 2022 when the pitch was a-buzzing, and all the mighty women of England had left their household chores for the day and put their boots on ready to clean some dishes. And clean up they did, beating Norway 8-0. It was the Women's Euro competition, a day where all the blokes down the pub took a quick glance at the television screen and said, "Nice one ladies, you're doing us proud," before turning back to discussing that ludicrous display last night, and those footballing women could get enough of what they had just accomplished. But that was not good enough, because not only were those women wearing white, they fucking were white! "Sir," calls out the director of diversity, "you have to come see this." "Sure, but it is they-them," replies the director of guild as he peers down at the television screen. "Do you see," says the director of diversity. "Can you tell what's happened here?" "My god," replies the director of guild. "Quick, send a message to every pitchside reporter that this is not acceptable in 21st century Britain."
Finals, but all starting 11 players and the 5 substitutes that came onto the pitch were all white. And that does point towards a lack of diversity in the women's game in England.
Says the public. I think the BBC must be onto something here, because winning 8-0 while being entirely white is just not cool. Well, that would have been the case if those dirty bigots weren't laughing their tits off at them. And this enraged the BBC, because up until now, they thought this social engineering was totally working. "It's time we knuckled down and got serious," says the director of diversity. "These white people are not buying that they're ingrained with dirty racism, even if they do claim to all have black friends. We need to go nuclear. Almost genocidal." "Are you sure?" calls over the chief of representation. "Is this not going a little bit too far now?" "No," he replies. "The British people are the most self-deprecating people I know, especially since they survive solely on beans on toast. We need to go hardlier at them, the most hardly we have ever gone before." "But who can do it?" cries the chief of representation. "Who can carry the weight of that social engineering?" "Get me a Scottish man." Enter Frankie Boyle, a Scottish comedian who stopped being funny about a decade ago, and with that began fading into irrelevancy. But one night as he slept, a radioactive spider bit him, and by the morning he became Simp Man, the social engineering cuck puppet, willing to carry any message as long as someone is paying him. So the BBC gave him his very own chat show that pretty much nobody watched. But there was one thing that everyone did get to see, and that was Sophie Duker, who told Mr. Boyle, "Yeah, that thing called whiteness, right? It's actually part of a capitalist structure and it's holding down minorities, and we should totally kill all white people." Nah, I joke, but we do want to kill all white people though. And the entirety of Britain laughed heartily, cutting edge comedy at its finest. But the government didn't find a humorous bucket of exploding AIDS within those lines, because singling out a race and then calling for genocide while thinly disguising it as a joke kind of doesn't sit well with them. So there was parliamentary outrage. The BBC had gone too far this time, and the Conservative government, with an overwhelming majority, stood in union pushing forward a motion to rip the Royal Charter up and defund the racist corporation. Oh wait, sorry guys, That was a little bit of the old fake news right there, because what actually happened was a couple of MPs wins on the internet, and that was about it. So that leads us up to 2023 BBC, where their own employees, paid for by the license fee payer, can't even stand working with white people. It hurts their mental health, because the lack of melanin in your skin is totally violence. Has anybody told him that he can fuck off through an airport? But hold those telephones, guys! An African American has just bought Twitter. And that's freaking terrible! Because if those African fellas start making money, then that will mean they're not dependent on government handouts. And then they'll stop voting for the plantation owners. Yes, that's right, audience. Let's welcome Elon Musk, the fake news BBC. The BBC must tell the truth. Kind of a given when you take public money. But some of you may be getting the indication already that they have some kind of hidden agenda here. And you'll be totally wrong. It's hard to tell the truth when the truth you tell is entirely subjective and based on anecdotal evidence. It's the strongest kind of evidence and cannot be made up. So they must spin a good narrative when the truth bombs come up a little short. So the African American buys the toilet bowl of the world, the platform where the BBC and the rest of the paid shills circle jerk their virtue. But there's a bit of an issue. That African man kind of really likes the idea of people being able to speak their mind. Which is utterly terrible. How can you let grown-ass adults who have formed their own opinions speak out on them and not be censored? And in some cases, like in the UK and Canada, actually get arrested by police who are also fully grown adults. We need to take him down, cries the director of diversity. Being able to speak on the internet is a travesty in the modern age, especially when they relentlessly mock us for pronoun policing aliens. Well, we could do the old faithful on him, replies the chief of inclusion. You know, bring out the accusers. No, we've tried to do that on Brett Kavanaugh, Russell Brand and Trump. They just don't believe us anymore. Drat, says inclusion. If only we had not overused those serious allegations against our political opponents and then trivialized the matter so that when their true assaults do happen, no one really actually believes us anymore. So they need to think. How can they take down the African man and show the world that being able to speak without government interference in a Western democracy is the sole reason democracy is dying? Maybe we could just interview him properly and get to know him a little bit more and reach some common ground. You know, maybe become friends, asks Commander Logic. What? They cry in union? Reaching common ground with the neo-1940s Germany man will be a trans genocide. We need to narrative him to utter death. I've got it, squeals diversity. How's about we accuse him of hate? That would totally be the adult thing to do. So on the 12th of April 2023, the African American and James Clayton sit down for a little chat, until Clayton begins re-raging at him. Since you took over Twitter, there has been a lot of hate on there, and that means that the N-word is being used without a pass. Oh, that's terrible, says the African American. You must have lots of evidence of this. I sure do, responds Clayton. I have seen it all over my timeline. Considers Elon. Can you show me this evidence? Because as an impartial publicly funded body, you're kind of obliged to. No, says Clayton. We don't have any of that, but I swear I have seen it. Okay then, just give me one example of hate that you have seen on Twitter, says Elon. Well, hisses Clayton through a forked tongue. I haven't personally seen the hate, but I've been told that other people have. So basically, you're lying then, you dirty, dirty smear merchants, responds Elon. And this came as a shock to everyone in the audience. Are the BBC lying and using public funds to run smear campaigns against ideologically opposed figures again for reputation damage? And yes, audience, I did say again, but behind the scenes, the BBC goes into utter meltdown mode. How did that one backfire so freaking easily? Or that Elon Musk and his devastatingly simple questions. It has damaged our credibility beyond repair. So quick, get the articles churning. We need to spin narratives right now. Elon denies hate speech on Twitter has spiked, while clearly writing in their own article that they don't have any evidence either. What a complete own goal that was. And then the salt just never stopped flowing. So to save face and become trusted by the public again, they decide the best thing to do is begin BBC Verify, a show that seeks to fact check people on the internet. So who are these targets that they go after? Is it the lovable far left who claim puberty blockers are safe for kids? Or about the other ones who say that mail-in voting is super safe and not open to widespread fraud at all? No, you silly gooses, it's used exclusively against those totally far-right extremists and their claims like, I don't know, mask wearing was nothing more than a comfort blanket. But there was one man, a mountain so to speak, who was locked firmly in the beady eyes of the BBC, Sir Carl Benjamin, formerly known as Sargon of Akkad. Now, the BBC and Podcast Man go way back, all the way to the time that Sir Carl, running for the UK Independence Party, stood on the stage and called them a bunch of dirty smear merchants. And also that time he said he would not have relations with Jessica Phillips, and then calmly dismantled a rabid goon on national television. But the BBC never really forgot that, so when running their totally truthful and not just a propaganda mouthpiece program called BBC Verify, they claimed Sir Carl went to Totnes twice for a far-right UKIP rally. And when he returned on the second visit, half the people who were protesting him on the first visit were now on his side because he recruited them using far-right mind magic. Interesting. Does BBC Verify, the fake news policeman, have any evidence of this claim? No, it turned out it was a total lie. The second visit to Totnes never actually happened. But their sources, they were so trustworthy. So what's next on the BBC's crusade against far-right misinformation? Well, audience, let's take a look at 15-minute cities. Remember those? The plan to ensure within a 15-minute walking distance of your house, all of your basic needs should be met with shops, doctor surgeries, and green spaces and all that. Sounds kind of nice, right? Well, yeah, but you're wrong. Dead wrong with the ultimate AIDS, because this really normal sounding idea has been co-opted by the dirty far-right who claim it's actually a ploy to control the civil population by local government. So the BBC need to think, how can we convince the British bigots that this is all a steaming pile of malarkey? I know, says Captain Disinformation, how's about we make a claim that nobody was making and then totally debunk it? Oh my balls, you're right, replies Corporal Wrongthink, but what shall we use? Maybe we can say that those far-right extremists with all their Ben Shapiro DVDs were saying that local councils are going to control how many times you can go to a shop. That's it, reads Captain Disinformation. Quick, write the article! But the public weren't buying it, because the claim that was actually made was the fact local councils were going to restrict your movement to travel by car through the city by dividing it up into zones and only allowing people to travel between them 100 times a year. And even then, you would need permission from the council to do so. And well, it was even in their own article. Private cars would not be allowed to go through without a permit, which they can use up to 100 days a year, but all other vehicles would be exempt, to incentivise the use of public transport and cycling. The BBC understands that Oxford was one of the places Mr. Harper had in mind when he spoke of councils that ration who uses the road and when. But while some people may find this controlling, it is definitely not the same as a 15-minute city. So those far-right Ben Shapiro extremists were absolutely right. They were literally trying to take civil liberties away. But wait, there's more, because news has just dropped that the BBC's Verify's own team couldn't even verify the resume of their own star fact-checker. Yes, that's right, audience. The host of the Totally Telling the Truth BBC is in fact a dirty liar too, because she created false events in her CV to propagate her career by saying she had worked alongside another BBC journalist called Sarah Rainsford, but it never actually happened. The BBC social engineering. If there's one thing the British do best, it's passive aggressiveness. We hate everyone, including ourselves. And when Barry Obama, an American, came over to our little green shithole in 2016, he told us bigots, you must vote to stay in the European Union or we'll all die to death. And the British collectively told him to get back on his little fucking plane and charter a flight to fuck off me land by voting to leave. And this act of wanting parliamentary sovereignty caused the BBC to go under utter nuclear meltdown. They were so mad they spilled all their soy milk. But during that Obama visit, something very interesting happened. As he stood there lecturing a foreign country on how to do their own internal politics, a they-them stood up in the crowd and said, "Hey Barry, I'm a big fan of all the drone strikes, but I need to tell you, I am a non-binary." Well, thought the British public, what a complete nonsensical statement that was. But those words, non-binary, it resonated with the BBC. And it must have meant something, because why would she have said that? So they start making it top news. But it turned out there were only a few people in the UK who actually cared about it, and then most of them were furries. We must convince the public that this is a real thing and not a narcissistic mental disorder dreamt up by a bunch of Tumblr rejects, says the Director of Diversity. Replies the Chief of Inclusivity. Maybe we should test the waters first. How's about releasing an article about a 10-year-old coming out as non-binary too? Are you sure, calls over Commander Logic? Is it not a little bit creepy that a 10-year-old is questioning gender when by all means they've barely stopped shitting their pants? No, reads Chief Diversity. Children should be forced to question their gender and sexual orientation at a very young age. How else are we going to settle all these puberty blockers? So they released the article, and no one apart from Child Services took any note of it. And then they started releasing documentaries all about being non-binary, and still no one cared. Drats, I thought that I'd have them this time, cries out Inclusivity. Maybe our social movement is not as popular as we think, and the general public are not obsessed with internet narcissism or intersectionality. You're wrong, replies Director of Diversity. The public are a bunch of bigots. We can release as many articles as we want, but they're just not going to read it. What we need to do is get serious. We need to go LGTV thermonuclear. No, this cannot be, whispers the Chief of Programming. Are you suggesting we take Doctor Who and use it as a vessel to propagandise the very people who pay us money? What? Responds Director Diversity. That's bloody insane. Geez, I'm just going to take other people's life work and use it as a vessel to install the message. You know, there's no harm done in taking Homer's Iliad and completely fucking with it. But what do you mean? Surely taking the precious work known to the world over needs to be handled with due care and attention, says Commander Logic. Oh, you would like that, wouldn't you? Shouts Director Diversity. No, I've had it with the bigotry. That clearly defined blonde-haired warrior man, he's now a sub-Saharan African. And also so is Zeus. It totally won't piss off the Greeks. And the British, in union, tuned in their cathode ray televisions to watch the BBC production. And they all fucking hated it. So the BBC went back to the drawing board. What else could they use for the vessel for the message? Maybe they can use Sir Terry Pratchett's life work and just completely fuck with it. Yes, shouts Diversity. Let's change Lord Veterinary into Lady Veterinary and Sybil Vimes into a woman of power. But best of all, guys, Cheery Little Bottom, the female dwarf, is now a fully grown, definitely a female, so don't question it, audience, they, them. And once again, the British tuned in their televisions and were visibly sick. This isn't working, cries Inclusivity. The bigoted public are telling us that if we want to have diverse characters that they have absolutely no problem with, then maybe we should stop taking clearly defined characters and instead create some new ones. You know, like we did in Luther. Damn it, grumbles Director Diversity. Suggesting we come up with some new material is literally hate speech. Get me Russell T. fucking Davis. Enter the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, a show loved by many and accessible for everybody. It is the best way to be because if you want to maximize the audience, you don't take a side politically. You just write a damn good show. But that's not good enough for the BBC because they get all the money anyway, so don't have to worry about losing it. And they have to really get the audience in on this one. And hiring Russell T Davies was just one way they can regain the viewership that was lost over the political diarrhea of the last few seasons. They also get David Tennant and Catherine Tate to come back because, well, they couldn't let a bittersweet ending lie. Not when they have the message to tell. But it isn't enough. Because what they really need was a trans character who couldn't just be a character in the show. Oh no, they had to affirm her every step of the way because of bigotry, while lecturing the bigoted doctor on the pronouns of aliens and being disgusted at the male presenting body he has. Oh, and also to destroy all those transmission phobes out there, she saves the day by being non-binary, and the internet absolutely loved it. For the show was indeed made for the modern audience, who strangely never showed up in droves to give it a good review. Maybe the BBC should have just left that legacy untouched. But leaving things untouched is not the BBC's way, especially when it comes to children. The nonce protecting BBC. It's a good day when you can state loudly and clearly that the BBC are a bunch of dirty nonce protectors. And you're not getting sued for it, because it's completely true. Oh, if only the license fee went on copious amounts of wood chippers instead, then this problem could have been cleared up years ago. So let's introduce, quite possibly, the most based thing the UK has ever done. Operation U-Tree. An investigation set up by the police to investigate the abuse of children within the media sphere. And it turned out surprisingly that there was a lot of it. Operation Yewtree was the result of an explosive realization that one of the BBC's biggest presenters was a complete and utter nonce. And even more damning was the fact that noncing Jimmy was using the BBC to access children. But that wasn't just it. The BBC had known for years that he was a nonce and by proxy facilitated all of it. Yes, that's right. The public broadcaster that spends all of his lawyers' fee money on lecturing the British people that they're a bunch of bigoted racists are in fact the utter scumbags. Who would have thought? And even worsier, when it came to the BBC creating their own drama documentary on the Savile Man, they even race-swapped one of his victims, because they just could not help themselves. But wait, there's more! Operation Yewtree ended up expanding like the branches of a pedo tree, and it turned out there were even more presenters noncing it. So let's have a look at the BBC Pedo Palace. Stuart Hall, convicted of noncery. Rolf Harris, also convicted of noncery. Mark Page, convicted of noncery. Peter Rowell, convicted of noncery. Tony and Julie Wadsworth, both convicted of being utter nonces. And then Ben Thomas, also convicted of noncery. Was there any indication that the BBC is a pedo palace before any of this happened? Well, actually, yes, because the very statue on the front of the building is a man holding a naked boy. What? It's been hiding in plain sight all this time? Who'd have guessed? And even worsier was the fact the sculptor who was commissioned by the BBC to create the statue was also a massive fucking nonce. So when Chad Chatterson climbed up the BBC building and brought the hammer down on it, calling the BBC a bunch of nonce protectors, the BBC was so disgusted by this act, they decided the best thing they could do was not take the pedo statue down, but actually repair it. What a fucking state this country is in. So here we are, audience, at the end of another crap simulation. And I cannot stress how much material I had for this episode. The list is just endless, and this could have gone on for hours, as the BBC is the nastiest publicly funded corporation in the United Kingdom and probably the world, and it should be immediately set on fire in Minecraft. But maybe one day, the entertainment will return and all this commie gobbledygook will die to death, just like how Hugh Edwards' career did after paying a 17-year-old drug addict for nudes. Big shout out to my Patreon boys and guys, Stephen P, Taylor J, Bill Blake, Andy Wood, conspiracyquery.net, the wonderful Mr. Wolf, Hetzer J, and of course, the Mighty Pen.
Subscribe button.
Is always right.